My name is Elizabeth Carter, and in 2017, I had a near-death experience that I can never forget. It didn't just change my life. It transformed the way I perceive God, life, and my very soul. Everything began on a chilly October morning. I woke up feeling strange. My throat itched, and my breathing felt heavy. At first, I thought it was just a mild allergic reaction, but soon I started gasping for air. I quickly grabbed my EpiPen, I had a severe nut allergy, and injected it into my thigh. But this time, it had no effect. My heart pounded, my breath became more erratic. I knew I was going into anaphylactic shock. My husband panicked, called for an ambulance, and all I could do was pray, "Lord, please don't let me die now." By the time the paramedics arrived, I could barely speak. They rushed me to the hospital in critical condition. But when we arrived, things got worse. The hospital was overcrowded. A nurse briefly examined me and then told me to wait because there were no available beds. I struggled to explain that I couldn't breathe, but she only gave me an indifferent look. They placed me in a wheelchair and left me in a quiet hallway where no one could see me. I felt like I was dying, unnoticed, abandoned. My body started to shut down. I reached for my second EpiPen and injected myself again. It bought me a few more minutes, but my breathing continued to worsen. I knew that if I wasn't treated soon, I wouldn't make it. A passing doctor heard my wheezing and immediately rushed over. That was the last thing I remembered before everything went completely dark. I felt no pain. When I opened my eyes, I saw myself floating above my body. Below me, doctors and nurses were frantically working to save me, intubating me, administering injections, fighting to bring me back. But the strangest thing was that I wasn't afraid. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace, as if I had shed all the worries and suffering of the world. I saw my husband standing outside the emergency room, his head in his hands, overcome with despair. I wanted to go to him, to comfort him, but I realized I could no longer touch this world. I was just a spirit, free from my physical form. Suddenly, I felt a powerful force pulling me backward. Everything faded into darkness. I found myself in a place of complete darkness, no light, no direction, no sound. I tried to move, but an invisible force seemed to hold me down. Fear crept in. I didn't understand where I was. Was this hell? Had God abandoned me? As these thoughts tormented me, the darkness tightened its grip. I tried to pray, but my prayers seemed to dissolve into the void. Doubt started to consume me. Lord, where are you? Why have you left me here? Then I heard a voice, gentle, yet filled with power. My child, you have never been abandoned. You are the one who built the walls that separated yourself from me. I gasped. The voice did not come from afar, but resonated deep within my soul. As I listened, a small ray of light appeared in the darkness. It wasn't blinding, but soft and warm. I felt drawn to it, and as I turned my heart toward the light, the darkness began to dissolve. I crossed the boundary between darkness and light, and before me stretched a breathtaking landscape, lush green fields, crystal clear rivers shimmering under a divine glow. There I saw a woman walking toward me. She had long, silvery hair and radiant blue eyes. The moment she smiled, I knew who she was, my mother. She had passed away when I was a child. I couldn't believe my eyes. I ran to her, and miraculously I could feel the warmth of her embrace. "Mom, you're alive," I cried. She smiled and said, "I never died, my dear child. We simply change forms. There is no death here, only continuation." Her words sent shivers through me. I felt an unconditional love radiating from her, a love that transcended time and space. Before I could say anything more, the sky suddenly glowed with an even greater light, a brilliance beyond anything I had ever seen. I felt an immense presence, a power beyond comprehension. Without thinking, I fell to my knees. I knew I was in the presence of God. The radiant light spread throughout the space, enveloping me in a warmth and peace that no words could describe. I felt an infinite power, not terrifying but rather filled with love and acceptance. I knelt not because I was forced to, but because I knew I was standing before the Creator. Then a voice echoed, not from a specific direction, but from everywhere. even from within my very soul. My daughter, why are you afraid? That voice was not just sound. It seeped into every part of me, sending shivers through my being. I bowed my head, tears streaming down my face. Lord, I doubted you. I lived a life full of fear and isolation. I didn't believe that you were always with me. A silence followed, not an empty silence, but one filled with deep understanding. You thought I had left you, but you didn't realize that I saw every tear you shed. I felt every pain you endured. I sobbed uncontrollably. Every word he spoke was like a healing balm on the wounds in my soul. Do you remember when you cried out in despair after your husband left? You thought I didn't hear, but I gave you the strength to raise your children. Do you remember when you were betrayed and lost faith in people? I didn't let you drown in hatred. I gave you compassion instead. Do you remember when you isolated yourself, thinking no one cared about you? But my child, you were the one who built the walls that kept me away. I was stunned. Everything he said was true. I had thought I was abandoned, but in reality, I had closed my own heart. I had pushed myself into the darkness without realizing that he had always been there, waiting for me to open my heart to him. Lord, I'm sorry. I do not need an apology. I only need you to understand that you have never been abandoned. I have always been with you, from the moment you were formed in your mother's womb. Suddenly, I felt a wave of warm light flow through me, as if I were being bathed in the purest love. Every emotional wound, every pain, every doubt and fear melted away. I no longer felt guilt. I no longer blamed myself. All that remained was love, a love so vast, so unconditional, without boundaries. Are you ready to return? His words startled me. Return? But I want to stay here. I have never felt such peace before. I created you with a purpose. Your life is not yet complete. You must go back. I hesitated. I didn't want to leave this place. I didn't want to return to the suffering and struggles of the world. But then I saw the faces of my son and daughter. I remembered the tears in my husband's eyes as he stood outside the emergency room. I realized that my journey was not over. I took a deep breath, even though I knew I no longer had a physical body to do so. Lord, if it is your will, I will return. The moment I uttered those words, I felt myself being pulled backward. The light slowly faded, and a cold sensation enveloped me. I opened my eyes. The beeping sounds of hospital machines surrounded me. The bright lights of the hospital room made me squint. I felt a warm hand holding mine. I turned my head and saw my husband, tears streaming down his face. You're back. You scared us to death. I blinked, looking around the room. My son stood in the corner, while my daughter clung tightly to my other hand. I was alive. A nurse walked in and smiled. You gave us quite a scare. We thought you wouldn't make it. I managed a small smile. I knew that I hadn't just survived. I had returned from death. I looked at my family and whispered, I was with God. He gave me a second chance. Everyone in the room fell silent. I knew they wouldn't understand right away, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that from this moment on, I would never again doubt his presence. I was no longer afraid. I was no longer alone. I now understood that I was created for a purpose, and I would dedicate the rest of my life to fulfilling that purpose, because I knew God was always with me.